There is a kind of calm that has no business existing inside a moment like that. A 911 call from a woman who says her husband has just been murdered in their own bedroom should sound like one thing, and one thing only: shattered. But Jennifer Nibb did not sound shattered. She sounded managed. And just a short while later, when a second officer arrived at that same house and asked her the same basic question, "Where were you when you heard the shot?" she gave a different answer than she had given the first. She told the first officer she had been in the shower. She told the second she had been brushing her teeth. Two officers. One morning. Two different versions of the same moment. That small, almost invisible contradiction, not a smoking gun, not a dramatic confession, was the first thread investigators pulled. And once they pulled it, the whole thing began to unravel. On the morning of August 31, 2010, Jennifer Nibb called emergency services from the family home near Lake Crystal, Minnesota. She told them a masked intruder had broken in. She told them the intruder had grabbed her husband's own rifle, carried it into the bedroom, and shot James Nibbe in the back of the head as he lay sleeping. She told them the intruder had grabbed her by the hair, dragged her through the house, bound her with rope, wrapped the rope around her neck, and cut her legs with a knife while attempting to assault her, before slipping out the back door and disappearing into the dark. She told them he had leaned close before he left and said, "You are lucky you are not dead." It was a detailed story. A practice story. Every single word of it was a lie. What investigators would uncover in the days and weeks that followed was not simply the story of a murder. It was the story of a woman who had been quietly, methodically, piece by piece, building toward this moment for longer than anyone around her had any reason to suspect. And the man who died in that bed never saw it coming. Because the danger was wearing a face he trusted completely. Welcome to Beneath Static Minds. Today's case, the case of Jennifer Nibb. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Now let us get into it. James Nibbe was 26 years old. People who knew him describe a young man who was genuinely easy to love. Someone with a quiet enthusiasm for the outdoors, for hunting and fishing and kayaking, for the kind of slow, unhurried life that southern Minnesota offers to those who want it. He had graduated from Minnesota West Community College. He worked as an apprentice electrician. He was a member of the local FFA chapter, a regular at the Ducks Unlimited events, a member of the Garden City Rod and Gun Club. He played golf and volleyball. He had a dog. He was, by every account, a good man. He married Jennifer Lee Gilman in May 2008. And from the outside, from the vantage point of neighbors and family and colleagues, the life they built together near Lake Crystal looked entirely stable. Entirely real. Jennifer was a licensed nurse working in patient care in Mankato. The image she projected to the world was warm, competent, present in the way that people who care for others in their most vulnerable moments are trained to be. But there was something happening beneath that image that no one in Jennifer Nibb's outer world was being allowed to see. Something that had not arrived suddenly. Something that had been building, accumulating layer by layer, for a long time before it reached its conclusion. The people around Jennifer noticed, in the months before August 2010, that she had been losing weight. Significant weight. The kind of weight loss that, when you look back at it with the knowledge of what was happening inside her body, begins to make sense in a way that nothing about her outward life did. Jennifer Nibb was not simply a wife under stress. She was a woman already disappearing. And the question that would consume this entire investigation was, from what exactly was she trying to escape? The first secret was not an affair. It was a prescription. Jennifer Nibb, a licensed nurse with professional access to controlled substances and to the patients in her care, had developed a dependency on prescription painkillers that had, by the time investigators began to map its full dimensions, become almost incomprehensible in its severity. She was stealing pills directly from the patients she was entrusted to treat. She was ordering tramadol through the mail, using the postal system to bypass the safeguards designed to prevent exactly this. She had taken prescription pads from her workplace and was forging doctor signatures to obtain opioids from pharmacies. And at the peak of her addiction, investigators determined she was consuming somewhere between 100 and 180 pills every single day. That number is not a typo. 100 to 180 pills. Daily. In her own words, captured on interrogation tape that was later released to the public, Jennifer described what that existence felt like. The pressure of everything, she said. The finances and the drugs. You live your day for that next fix. The financial consequences of that habit were catastrophic. The family had a second mortgage on their home and was behind on payments. Credit card debt was accumulating. And Jennifer, who managed the household finances, was managing them in a way that ensured Jim never saw the full picture of how bad things had become. He was living in a house that was quietly drowning, and he had no idea. But the drug addiction, devastating as it was only one of the lives Jennifer was living in secret. Because sometime around June of 2010, just 2 months before Jim's death, Jennifer Nibb began exchanging text messages with another man. Her cousin was the one who first noticed. She told investigators that Jennifer had been sending this man flirtatious, then explicit, messages and photographs. Messages that escalated quickly. Messages that went places that made clear to anyone reading them that this was not a friendship that had briefly crossed a line. This was a sustained, consuming attachment, one that had, by the summer of 2010, become the emotional center of Jennifer Nibb's inner world. And Jim, sleeping in the next room, knew nothing about it. But the drug addiction, devastating as it was only one of the lives Jennifer was living in secret. Because sometime around June of 2010, just 2 months before Jim's death, Jennifer Nibb began exchanging text messages with another man. Her cousin was the one who first noticed. She told investigators that Jennifer had been sending this man flirtatious, then explicit, messages and photographs. Messages that escalated quickly. Messages that went places that made clear to anyone reading them that this was not a friendship that had briefly crossed a line. This was a sustained, consuming attachment, one that had, by the summer of 2010, become the emotional center of Jennifer Nibb's inner world. And Jim, sleeping in the next room, knew nothing about it. Around August 1, 2010, exactly 30 days before Jim Nibb was killed, Jennifer began writing in a journal. Investigators recovered it. And what they found inside was not what Jennifer's defense team would later claim. It was not the record of a woman living in fear. It was not the account of someone being abused. It was, instead, the private emotional accounting of a woman who had already made up her mind. She wrote about a marriage that had gone dead for her. She wrote about a husband who wasn't contributing financially, who had money for hunting trips and fishing trips but not, in her telling, for the household. She wrote about the other man. About being in love with someone else. And she wrote, clearly, without ambiguity, without grief, that Jim was a good man. But that she did not want to be with him anymore. Not that she was frightened of him. Not that she was suffering at his hands. Not that she had no way out. Simply, that she had already decided. That the marriage, in her internal world, was already over. And here is what makes that journal entry so psychologically disturbing. She did not write those words in anger. She wrote them calmly. The way a person writes about a decision that has already been made and simply needs to be acted upon. Later, when her attorneys would argue in court that Jennifer had been a victim of ongoing physical and sexual abuse at Jim's hands, that she had acted in the heat of passion, compelled by trauma and fear, prosecutors would point to this journal. Those pages, written in Jennifer's own hand in the 30 days before she shot him, contain not a single allegation of abuse. Not one. The abuse narrative did not exist until lawyers became involved. It appeared nowhere in the private, unfiltered record of her own thoughts. Nowhere. In the months before Jim Nibb was killed, Jennifer took out a life insurance policy on him. $250,000. With herself listed as the sole beneficiary. And here is the detail that makes that policy particularly significant. The detail that closes a door on coincidence entirely. When the policy was taken out, Jim was tested for HIV as part of the insurance application process. He tested negative. Clean. Healthy. Jennifer knew this. She was a nurse. She had the medical literacy to fully understand what that result meant. And yet, months later, after Jim was dead, after his body had been through a post-mortem examination, a rapid screening test on his body returned a positive result for HIV and hepatitis. His defense attorneys attempted to weaponize that result. They suggested it implied Jim had been unfaithful, that he had hidden illness, that it explained why Jennifer had taken out the policy, that it somehow supported the abuse narrative. What they did not fully address is that Jim had already tested negative just months earlier, and that rapid post-mortem HIV screening tests are notoriously unreliable, prone to false positives in ways that the medical examiner and the science make clear. Jennifer, as a licensed nurse, knew that too. But the insurance policy was not the only evidence of preparation. Investigators, rebuilding the timeline of the months before August 31, 2010, found something in the phone records that moved this case from tragedy into a category that is harder to name. There was evidence, referenced in the Nibb family's own legal filings, that the shooting may not have been the first attempt on Jim's life. That there had been a plan earlier involving a staged car accident. that this had been explored as a method before the method that was ultimately used. The full details of that earlier alleged plan were never publicly adjudicated. Attorneys were still looking into it when the case resolved. But the suggestion, and it is a verified suggestion from the family's own legal team, is that August 31, 2010 was not the first time Jennifer Nibb had considered how Jim might die. On the afternoon of August 30, 2010, the day before James Nibbe was killed, Jennifer Nibb exchanged text messages with her boyfriend. Investigators recovered every one of them. Those messages included explicit photographs exchanged between the two. And they included something else. A plan. Not a vague discussion of the future. Not an expression of longing for a different life. A specific plan, for the two of them to meet for a sexual encounter on September 2, 2010. 2 days after Jim was dead. The rendezvous had been scheduled. The details had been agreed upon. And they had been committed to text message the afternoon before Jennifer walked into her husband's bedroom with his own shotgun. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about what it means to sit in that house on that afternoon, to send those messages, to make those arrangements, to go through whatever version of a normal evening followed, knowing what you have decided will happen before sunrise. Jim Nibbe went to sleep that night with no reason to believe it was the last time he would. He had a wife. He had a home. He had a dog and a truck and a job he went to and plans for the weekend. He had no idea that in the hours ahead, the woman sleeping beside him had already texted another man to make plans for the days after his death. He closed his eyes. And he did not wake up. In the early hours of August 31, 2010, Jennifer Nibb took a shotgun, her husband's own weapon, carried it into the room where James Nibbe was sleeping, and shot him in the back of the head. Jim never woke up. What followed was methodical. Jennifer inflicted cuts on her own thighs. She pressed something against her own neck hard enough to produce bruising. She found rope and arranged it around herself to simulate the restraints she would claim an intruder had used. She constructed, as carefully as she could, the physical evidence of a home invasion that had never occurred. And then, when the staging was complete, she made 2 phone calls. The first was to 911. The second was made by a 16-year-old boy in the next room. Brady Brown, Jennifer's son from a previous relationship, had been asleep in the house while all of this happened. He woke up to his mother standing in his doorway, telling him that an intruder had broken in and shot Jim. Brady did not hesitate. He loaded a second shotgun to protect himself and his mother. And then he called 911. He reported that his mother had been injured, cut he said, but that the injuries were, in his words, not that bad. Not bad enough for an ambulance. He was 16 years old. He was trying to protect his mother. He had no idea that the person he was trying to protect was the person who had just committed the crime he was reporting. Brady Brown is perhaps the most quietly devastating presence in this entire case. A child who woke up inside a lie his mother had built. Who armed himself to protect her. Who called the police on her behalf. Who, in the days that followed, grieved a man he had lived with as a stepfather, while his mother stood beside him and let him believe a stranger was responsible. There are no words that adequately account for what that cost him. When first responders arrived at the Nibb home that morning, they were met by a woman with self-inflicted injuries, a rehearsed account of a masked intruder, and a teenage boy who had already called for help on her behalf. The story Jennifer told was detailed. The intruder had come through an unlocked door. He had gone straight to the bedroom. He had used Jim's own shotgun. He had grabbed her by the hair, dragged her to the living room, bound her with rope, cut her legs with a knife, attempted to assault her, and then told her she was lucky to be alive before slipping out the back. But when investigators walked that story against the physical scene, something kept not fitting. There were no footprints outside. No tire tracks in the mud from that rainy August morning. No signs of forced entry. No forensic trace of anyone who had arrived or departed. The scene had the shape of a home invasion but not the texture. And then there was the contradiction between what Jennifer told the first officer and what she told the second. The shower versus the bathroom sink, the small shift in detail that should not have existed if the memory was real. Investigators did not arrest Jennifer Nibb that morning. They spoke with her. They documented the contradictions. And then they watched. Because sometimes, the most important investigative move is simply waiting to see what a person does when they believe they have gotten away with it. This is the detail that defines this case more than any other. More than the insurance policy. More than the text. More than the staged injuries. More even than the confession. In the days between August 31, 2010 and her arrest, while investigators were quietly building their case, while phone records were being requested and evidence was being catalogued, Jennifer Nibb was not in custody. She was free. And she used that freedom to do something that requires a particular kind of internal landscape that most people simply cannot access. She called the mortuary. She made the funeral arrangements for the husband she had killed. She selected the details, coordinated the logistics, organized the service, all of it for a man she had shot in the back of the head while he slept in their bed. And then she attended the funeral. Jennifer stood among Jim's family at that service. His parents, his siblings, the people who had loved him since he was born. She accepted their comfort. She let them hold her. She performed grief alongside people who were not performing. And every single one of them believed she was suffering the same loss they were. Days later, investigators placed her under surveillance. She was observed going to her boyfriend's apartment. Not hiding. Not in crisis. Not falling apart. Going. Jennifer Nibb was arrested on September 10, 2010, not at her home, not fleeing, not in the night. She was arrested outside her office. She had gone back to work. She had returned to the hospital where she worked as a nurse, where patients trusted her with their care, where she moved through corridors in scrubs, with a stethoscope as a professional, in the days after murdering her husband and attending his funeral. That is the depth of the compartmentalization this case requires us to sit with. In custody, Jennifer initially maintained the story. The intruder. The shotgun. The rope. But investigators had already begun dismantling the architecture of that account. The phone records, the surveillance footage, the financial evidence, the journal, the physical contradictions at the scene. And faced with the accumulated weight of what had been assembled against her, Jennifer Nibb began to tell the truth. She admitted there had been no intruder. She admitted she had shot Jim in the back of the head as he slept. She admitted she had inflicted the wounds on her own body. She admitted she had staged the crime scene. She told him Jim was a good man. And then she said something that has been almost entirely absent from every documentary, every recap, every piece of coverage this case has ever received. She told investigators that she had been compelled to act by voices in her head. Voices. That claim, offered inside a confession that was otherwise coherent and detailed, prompted a psychiatric evaluation. Investigators were not going to allow that door to remain open. The evaluation was completed. Jennifer Nibb was found fully competent to stand trial. On that interrogation tape, portions of which were later released publicly, Jennifer can be heard cycling through the emotional register of someone who has, for the first time, lost control of the narrative. It was horrible, she said. It was horrible. Once it happened, I thought, what did I do? What did I do? I took somebody's son. I killed somebody's brother and grandson and uncle. I know Jim is in heaven. And if I try to take my own life, I won't be with him. I don't know how I'm going to live with this the rest of my life. I don't know. These words, coming from the person who texted a boyfriend the afternoon before and scheduled a sexual rendezvous for 2 days after, from the person who went to the funeral she organized, are not easy to place. They sounded real in that room. And perhaps they were, in that moment. But the living with it had already been practiced, hadn't it? 4 days at the funeral, receiving condolences, it had been practiced. Horror, it seems, can coexist with everything else. That is one of the most disturbing things this case teaches us. After Jennifer's arrest and confession, her attorneys went to work. They attempted, first, to have the case dismissed entirely, arguing that she had been interrogated without a lawyer present. That motion failed. They then constructed a defense around the claim that Jennifer had been the victim of ongoing physical and sexual abuse at Jim's hands, that she had suffered from PTSD as a result, that the killing had been an act committed in the heat of passion by a woman pushed beyond endurance. Their expert witness was prepared. 2 of Jim's ex-girlfriends had been lined up to testify about his character. The autopsy's contested HIV result was going to be entered into evidence. Adult pornography found in the home was going to be presented to the jury. The defense was built piece by piece to reframe Jim Nibbe, the man in the grave, as the real source of danger in that house. There was one problem. Jennifer's own journal, written in her own handwriting in the 30 days before his death, contained no mention of abuse. Not a word. Not an implication. Nothing. The journal described financial frustration, romantic detachment, and desire for another man. It did not describe fear. And Jennifer had never filed a police report. Never sought a protective order. Never told a friend, a family member, or a colleague, in any documented form, that she was afraid of her husband. The abuse narrative had appeared in its fully formed shape only after lawyers became involved. Prosecutors pointed to all of this. And before the case went to trial, Jennifer Nibb agreed to plead guilty. Her attorneys suggested, outside the courtroom, that Jennifer had taken the plea to protect Jim's image, to spare the family from having evidence of his alleged behavior presented in open court. But Jim's family had a different view of that framing. Jim's sister stood at the sentencing and said that Jennifer's lack of remorse, her inability to simply look at the family and say she was sorry for killing their son and brother, was, in the family's word, disgusting. The apology they had waited for did not come that day. There is one more detail about Jennifer Nibb that has been almost entirely overlooked in the years of coverage this case has received. While she was sitting in jail awaiting trial, charged with first-degree murder, facing the possibility of life in prison, Jennifer Nibb wrote a letter to the judge. By hand. In it she asked for two things. She asked for her bail to be lowered. And she asked the judge to allow her to leave the jail for a few hours to attend her son Brady's high school graduation. I understand the severity of my charges, I do, she wrote. But I'm still innocent until proven guilty, and you may be laughing at all this, but he's my only child, he'll be graduating with honors. The letter was filed confidentially and only made public later. Brady Brown, the boy who had loaded a shotgun to protect his mother on the morning she called him into the middle of a murder she had committed, was graduating with honors. And his mother, from inside a jail cell where she sat accused of killing the man who had been, for all practical purposes, his stepfather, was asking a judge for 2 hours of freedom to watch it happen. The request was denied. There is no clean way to hold that detail. The love for a child, coexisting inside the same person who had done what she had done, is not something a simple verdict resolves. It simply sits there, unresolved, the way so much of this case sits. In July 2012, Jennifer Nibb appeared before Blue Earth County District Court Judge Bradley Walker and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder under a Norgard plea, a legal mechanism in which a defendant claims no memory of the act, but acknowledges that the evidence would likely result in a conviction if the case went to trial. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 8.5 years of supervised release. She was ordered to pay $11,400 in restitution, to cover the cost of the funeral she had planned and attended. The judge issued a special order prohibiting Jennifer from financially benefiting from her husband's death. That order became necessary when it emerged that media outlets had already contacted her, willing to pay for her story. Jim's sister, Leslie Johnson, spoke at sentencing. She said that Jennifer's refusal to simply look at the family and say she was sorry for killing their son, their brother, their uncle, that absence of acknowledgement, was disgusting. Jennifer said nothing that day. 2 years later, in 2014, Jennifer appeared again, this time shackled, shuffling to a witness stand in a wrongful death civil case brought by Jim's family, who had sought $1 million in damages. A jury awarded the family $220,000. And for the first time, Jennifer said what her family had been waiting 2 years to hear. I would, at this time, like to take responsibility and accountability for my actions, she said. She cried. She apologized to Jim's family, to her own family, for shooting James Nibbe in the back of the head while he slept. Her father, Dan Gilman, was present. He told reporters his daughter was truly sorry for what she had done. Jim's family issued a statement that said everything a statement in a moment like that can say. Although we are saddened we did not have an opportunity to show the true, soulless character of Jim's murderer, it read, we are happy to have this behind us and look forward to happier days in which Jim's memory will always have a place. Jennifer Nibb's scheduled release date is August 7, 2027. She is currently held at MCF Shakopee, the Minnesota Correctional Facility for Women. But in the spring of 2026, more than 15 years after she stood over her sleeping husband and pulled the trigger, a new development forced Jim's family back into a process they had no power over. Jennifer Nibb applied for work release, a program that would allow her to leave the facility for employment purposes, under supervision, before her official release date. Jim's sister, Leslie Johnson, was notified by the Minnesota Department of Corrections. She told Alpha News what that call felt like. This is just re-victimizing a family again, she said. She asked to be included in the process. She was told the proceedings were not public. She was told she had no formal right to provide input. They told me I don't have a right to provide input, she said. The Minnesota Department of Corrections confirmed that Jennifer had received tentative approval, contingent on her continued behavior in custody and subject to final review by the Commissioner of Corrections. Regardless of the outcome of the work release application, the scheduled release date remains August 7, 2027. She will walk out. And Jim Nibbe will still be 26 years old. In a grave in southern Minnesota. In the ground where his family buried him, in a service his wife organized and attended while pretending to be a fellow victim. That is the arithmetic of this case. That is the number that does not change no matter what any court decides. There are questions this case leaves behind that no sentence, no release date, no civil judgment, no public apology will ever answer. What did Jennifer Nibb feel standing at that graveside? What was happening behind her eyes when Jim's mother held her? When Brady stood beside her at the funeral, grieving the man he had tried to protect with a loaded shotgun on the morning of his death, what did Jennifer feel in that moment? She told investigators she did not know how she was going to live with what she had done. But she already was living with it. She had been living with it at the funeral. Living with it at work, in the corridors of the hospital, in the days between the murder and the arrest. The capacity to hold that, to function inside it, to maintain a face that the world accepts while carrying something like that beneath, is not a capacity most people have access to. And the most disturbing thing it tells us is not about Jennifer Nibb specifically. It is about the limits of what we can know about another person. Brady Brown woke up on August 31, 2010, to his mother calling him into the middle of a murder scene she had constructed. He loaded a gun to protect her. He called 911 on her behalf. He grieved at a funeral organized by the person responsible. He graduated with honors while his mother sat in jail and wrote to a judge asking for 2 hours of freedom to watch it happen. No one who has covered this case has spent adequate time with what Brady Brown was asked to carry. Not as a victim in the formal legal sense, but as a child who trusted the person he was supposed to be able to trust most, and had that trust used, without his knowledge, without his consent, as cover for something he could not have imagined. James Nibbe was 26 years old. He was born in Mankato, Minnesota, on October 30, 1983. He went to Lake Crystal Welcome Memorial High School. He graduated from Minnesota West Community College. He worked as an apprentice electrician. He loved hunting, fishing, kayaking. He had a dog. He played golf and volleyball. He was present in his community in ways that spoke to someone who intended to stay. He married Jennifer Lee Gilman in May 2008. He was dead by August 2010. And the woman who killed him, who staged a crime scene, called 911, managed her teenage son through the morning, went back to work, planned the funeral, stood at the graveside, accepted condolences, went to her boyfriend's apartment, was arrested outside her office, claimed voices in her head, wrote to a judge from jail asking for 2 hours to watch her son graduate, and eventually apologized in a shackled courtroom appearance 2 years after sentencing. That woman is scheduled to walk free in August 2027. Somewhere in southern Minnesota, a family is still counting the days. Not toward a release date. Toward something that no legal system has ever been designed to provide. Toward the version of justice that doesn't exist. The one where none of it happened at all. The most terrifying betrayals are not committed by strangers. They are committed by people who know where you sleep. By people who have earned the right to be in the room. By people whose faces are the last thing you see as normal before the normal ends.